All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you for those of you who are watching us on live stream. We're going to get started today with our panel talking about the American Broadband Initiative. My name is Karen Hanson. I am with NTIA, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, part of the Department of Commerce. Very happy to be here with my panelists, who I'll introduce in a second. But just to give a little bit of context, I wanted to thank Susan and Partnership for Progress on the Digital Divide for inviting us today to give you some information about the American Broadband Initiative. We did a webinar about this launch back in February, and Susan asked us if we could do a recreation of it here. So recognizing that some folks may have already seen that webinar, we decided to adjust it just a little and invite some folks from a couple different agencies to join us today. But if you're interested in the full webinar with the other agencies who were invited back in February, that is available on NTIA's website. But today, I'm pleased to say that we have some great panelists. First up will be Kelsey Guyselman, who is with the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. She is a senior policy counsel and has been intimately involved with the creation of this initiative and worked on broadband issues in her past life as well. So she brings a wealth of information, and she'll be giving us the initial overview of what the American Broadband Initiative is and what it's doing. Next, she'll be followed by my colleague Amy Tseng from NTIA, who will talk a little bit more about what NTIA is doing in the realm of digital inclusion and broadband adoption. She will be followed by Dina Lehmann-Kim, my colleague from the Department of Housing and Urban Development, who will talk about what HUD has been doing to contribute to the American Broadband Initiative. And finally, last but not least, James Neal from the Institute of Museum and Library Services will be here to talk about what they're doing to advance broadband adoption and digital literacy. So the other little bit of context that I want to share is that we are not purporting to represent everything that is going on at the federal level with respect to broadband. This is a slice of what the federal government is doing, but we wanted to make sure that we shared it with you and gave you our perspective on what's happening. And so we'll go through each of these presentations, and then we'll have time for Q&A at the end. So first, Kelsey.
Thank you, Karen, and thank you for having me today to talk about the administration's work on rural broadband deployment. From the beginning of the administration, promoting increased broadband connectivity has been a priority, particularly in the unserved parts of rural America. Nearly 39% of rural Americans still lack connectivity, creating a digital divide that is increasingly more devastating as reliance on the internet grows. Whether for agriculture, manufacturing, small business, education, or healthcare, the advancements we are seeing in technology are only possible if you have high-speed broadband. With this in mind, the administration has taken several steps over the past few years to promote the deployment of broadband in America. In April of 2017, the President directed Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue to develop recommendations for improving prosperity in rural America. The report that resulted highlighted how critical broadband is to achieving this goal. In January of 2018, at the time that the report was presented to the President, President Trump signed 2 executive actions aimed at improving the processes for siting communications infrastructure on federal property. And in October of 2018, he directed the development of a national spectrum strategy seeking to better utilize spectrum to increase connectivity. And then just the last 3 weeks ago, Chairman Pai joined President Trump for a press conference highlighting the importance of 5G and connectivity, particularly rural broadband. And the chairman announced a new program using universal service funding to promote broadband deployment. Over the past year and a half, the White House, NTIA, and USDA have led the American Broadband Initiative, a multi-agency effort focused on removing barriers to broadband deployment and making it easier for broadband providers to build out networks across the country. With the commitment of more than 20 different agencies, we sought to make better sense of the way that the federal government actions impact broadband deployment. The goal of the effort is in many ways fairly simple, removing the burdensome regulations and requirements and fostering opportunities for increased private sector investments. In February of this year, we released a comprehensive report detailing the achievements of the federal agencies so far in this administration, as well as commitments to future changes. And perhaps most importantly, we've included timelines for completing those commitments. Here's the report. If anyone's interested, I highly recommend checking it out. It's available on NTIA's website, I believe. The Broadband Initiative is focused on 3 primary areas of agency initiatives, driven by straightforward principles. First, streamlining federal permitting processes. Government processes should be clear, transparent, and responsive to stakeholders. Agencies are making changes to allow easier and faster construction of infrastructure. By reducing permitting delays, minimizing paperwork, and making clear who the right federal point of contact is, we're allowing broadband providers to spend less time and money on bureaucracy and focus on building networks. To reform the current system, the General Services Administration will revise the forms for permitting requests. Next is leveraging federal assets. We believe federal assets should provide the greatest possible benefit to stakeholders and the public. The federal government owns, manages, and operates a great deal of land and infrastructure across the country, including towers and other structures. Allowing private sector operators to access those assets easily and at a reasonable cost will encourage investment and additional deployment across the country. Consistent with this goal, DOI, the Department of the Interior, has created a map of thousands of tower locations that will be available to service providers as they look to expand their networks. And finally, maximizing the impact of federal funding. We believe the federal government should be a good partner or a good steward of taxpayer funds. While the private market is best at building and deploying broadband networks, financial partnerships and assistance from the federal government can help close the gap in rural America. The USDA has committed to this goal as they distribute $600 million in new federal investments in a rural broadband pilot program, prioritizing projects that increase productivity and improve the rural quality of life. As you can see on this slide, the ABI is led from representatives from the White House, from NTIA, and from USDA. Each of the work streams that focus on the 3 areas that I just highlighted is chaired by agencies with particular equities and expertise in that area. It consists of other agencies that are connected to the activities of the work stream. And I'd like to take just a moment to thank all of the agencies for the work and resources they have devoted to this project, particularly the co-chairs of these work streams. This has taken a tremendous amount of time and effort and couldn't have happened without their willingness to commit to this initiative. So I'll briefly touch on each of the work streams in more depth. First is the federal funding work stream. Again, the basic underlying concept here is that federal funding for broadband should target areas of need, be simple for broadband project sponsors to identify funding opportunities, and leverage state and local policies and programs to make better and more efficient use of federal dollars. The members of this work stream represent agencies that have a funding stream that can be utilized for broadband deployment, adoption, education, or equipment. Some, like USDA and the FCC, have funds dedicated specifically to broadband deployment, while others have funding that includes broadband as an allowable expense. This work stream seeks to address multiple challenges, including imprecise broadband availability data, limited coordination across federal programs, and with state and local governments, and inconsistent accountability measures for recipients of funds. The American Broadband Initiative seeks to address these challenges through several actions, including those listed here. NTIA has put a one-stop for broadband funding information on their website, allowing providers to access a whole variety of different programs they may not have been aware of. In addition, NTIA has a pilot program for mapping to improve some of the availability of data on where broadband service is available and where there are coverage gaps. USDA's Reconnect program is focused on improving the efficacy and the reach of federal broadband funds. This innovative program is looking at new ways to provide subsidies for rural broadband deployment. In addition, we're conducting a cross-agency review of programs and processes, as well as recommendations for improvements, modernizing accountability metrics, and engaging with private sector, state and local, and tribal partners. The next work stream is streamlining federal permitting. The key challenges we found in this area were centered around some of the confusing processes, the long timelines, and inconsistencies in application requirements. On average, it can take nearly a year to complete the process for authorizing a communications use. In addition, agencies have authority over implementing different provisions, such as categorical exclusions to rules, which means that it's far more difficult to get broadband permits from some agencies than others. Some of the key actions we are taking to address these challenges include the development of a common application form based on an existing form, the SF-299, that is used for transportation and utility siting. This form is being updated to reflect the needs of telecommunications siting projects. Another sort of one-stop shop for permitting information, again on the NTIA website. Harmonization and streamlining of regulations, including a cross-agency review of existing regulations so that we have a better idea of what the challenges are that we will face in making these regulations work together. And finally, implementing the siting provisions in the Mobile Now legislation, which includes several reforms that will improve the processes for permitting. And finally, we have the leveraging federal assets work stream. This is focused on federal assets like tower facilities, buildings, and land that can be made available for use in deploying broadband infrastructure as much as possible to lower the cost of broadband build-out and encourage private sector companies to expand telecom infrastructure, particularly in rural America. While there are many federal assets that are regularly leveraged to support network deployments, we're looking at some of the non-traditional resources that can also be used. To that end, the Broadband Initiative is completing an agency survey of assets managed by a variety of agencies to identify additional asset classes that can be leveraged to further support telecom networks. In addition, we're developing recommendations to create a standardized process to make information about these assets accessible for public and/or commercial use, and those will be published. And finally, the Department of Interior has put together a map pursuant to the executive order that was signed by the president last year that makes available DOI-managed towers and highlights where they are, who the point of contact is, and how to access them as for commercial providers. And thank you so much. And if you would like more information, as I said, the report is available online. This is a project that we continue to be committed to, and we will be sharing more information in the months to come as to the progress of implementation of these commitments.
Hello, my name is Amy Tseng, and as I work with Karen at Broadband USA, which is an initiative at the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, NTIA for short. And my focus is actually on digital inclusion, broadband adoption, digital skills training, but I'm here to talk more broadly about what Broadband USA does. Oops. There you go. Just a quick summary on NTIA. So we're part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. NTIA is responsible for advising the executive branch on telecommunications and information policy issues. The NTIA's major initiatives cover broadband policy and technical assistance through the Broadband USA program, spectrum policy, policy around the internet economy, including digital privacy, Internet of Things, and internet governance, as well as public safety. And one thing I just want to note that there's oftentimes confusion about NTIA versus the FCC, and basically the distinction is the FCC is an independent regulatory agency, and NTIA is actually part of the Department of Commerce, which means we are part of the executive branch, reporting ultimately up to the White House. So I just want to share this slide to show kind of our vision and why we do this work. And really what we're trying to do is help communities realize this vision of a connected community where they use broadband technology to create cost efficiencies, to improve sustainability, promote economic and workforce development, and increase civic engagement, as well as enhance the health and quality of life for their residents. So again, this is the big picture vision. And how do we do that? We actually work with communities across the countries, both local communities as well as at the state level, and we help them increase broadband access and usage, improve digital skills and community awareness of broadband by educating stakeholders and communities through our website, which Kelsey mentioned before, toolkits and webinars. We also convene stakeholders such as government entities, industry, nonprofits, and advocacy groups, and we also provide direct technical assistance to inform and advise communities. So, as mentioned previously, the Broadband USA has a wealth of resources, including a one-stop site for the information about broadband funding opportunities that are available from the federal agency. And in fact, this information was most recently gathered through the federal funding workstream. We also provide information about broadband permitting information to help guide and inform communities about the permitting processes for broadband deployment. And again, providing this information on the website are two of NTIA's key actions for the American Broadband Initiative. We also provide information about state broadband programs, including descriptions of grant funding opportunities at the state level, as well as mapping programs. My colleague, Catherine Bates, facilitates the State Broadband Leaders Network, and this is a cohort of people who work in state government on broadband, and they meet both regularly online as well as in person. So just to, in addition, I mentioned our website provides a number of toolkits. Actually, this is one that I had worked on. This toolkit guides communities through planning processes that encompasses broadband deployment as well as broadband adoption strategies and digital skills initiatives. So there are case studies from communities across the country. We have similar guides on stakeholder engagement, public-private partnerships, digital inclusion, and we really have tried to make our toolkits action-oriented and relevant to people on the ground who are trying to implement programs. We have a series of monthly webinars on different broadband and digital inclusion topics. Our speakers include our own in-house experts and experts from federal agencies, researchers, as well as practitioners and policymakers who are implementing programs on the ground. We've gotten a lot of feedback that people who are out there in the field really appreciate hearing from their peers and hearing from people who are trying to implement similar programs. We have an upcoming webinar on June 19th about building smart communities at a regional level. That's facilitated by my colleague Jean Rice, and please feel free to join us. You can go to the website to register or just give us your email. And we'll send you the announcement. And we also provide direct technical assistance to communities, and actually that's my primary role. I work with a lot of local and state governments, as I mentioned, and their key partners, including nonprofits, housing agencies, economic development agencies on their broadband adoption and digital skills strategies. I've been really excited. In the last several years, there's been a real blossoming and growth of the field, particularly with mid-sized municipalities, Pittsburgh, Chattanooga, Louisville, Kentucky, Nashville, Charlotte. I mean, a lot of cities are, as they seek to become innovation hubs and really are looking at innovation as an economic growth strategy, are realizing the importance of digital skills and digital inclusion. We're also seeing this in suburbs such as Arlington County, right across the river, and they'll be speaking tomorrow on a panel that I'm moderating, as well as at the state level, including Tennessee and North Carolina. So again, there's a lot of activity sort of bubbling up at this point. Another thing we do is we present regional workshops all over the country, and the whole point is to get people in person to meet and to really help facilitate partnerships and really connect peers and stakeholders and share best practices. And we also gather cohorts online. For example, I mentioned the State Broadband Leaders Network. I have a group of state and local government staff who meet regularly to talk about digital inclusion. I have a colleague who works a lot with smart communities, particularly through the NIST Global Cities Team Challenge initiative. We're huge proponents of data-driven policy making, and again, this is another trend in the field. I'm really seeing how communities and states are using data, broadband data, to drive both policy and funding decisions, things like where to deploy public Wi-Fi, where to focus training programs, where to focus more infrastructure development and assistance. So you'll be hearing later on from my colleague, Rafi Goldberg, about the Digital Nation Research, which is a long-standing body of research where there's a detailed survey about computer and internet use, which is a supplement to the census current population survey. And this is administered to about 52,000 households. And you can actually go and do a deep dive on the data, which is in the Digital Nation Data Explorer. And again, he'll be talking about that at another session. And you can see things at a state and national level. There's also the American Community Survey, has computer and internet use data. This is an annual survey, about 3.5 million households, so you can see it's a much bigger data set. What's really exciting this year is that for the first time, we have 5 years worth of data so that basically we can look at broadband subscription and computer ownership data rates at the census tract level. So we can really, this is really helpful for driving policy decisions at the local level because you can really target communities. The FCC also collects broadband deployment and provider information, as well as subscription data directly from service providers. As Kelsey mentioned before, one of the agency actions for the American Broadband Initiative is to update the national broadband availability map in coordination with the FCC, states, and the private sector. And again, the purpose is really to help state and federal policymakers identify regions with insufficient service, particularly in rural areas. The Broadband USA is expecting, launching a pilot for the mapping tool this fall with the partnership of 8 states. And in concluding, we're here to help. So please contact us, go to our website, again, join our webinars. We have a regular newsletter. We will send you information about regional workshops. If your community or state needs more detailed information, more help, you can request technical assistance. So, thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Dina Lehmann-Kim, and I'm from the Department of Housing and Urban Development in the Office of Public Housing Investments, and I'm very happy to talk to you today about what HUD is doing to support the American Broadband Initiative. Wait, which way? Which button am I pressing? Oh, that's why. There we go. Sorry. Okay. So we participate in the American Broadband Initiative on the federal funding stream. And HUD has two rules and an initiative called Connect Home USA, and those are our primary ways that we contribute to this work. I don't work on the rules or really in the offices that are affected by these rules, so if you have questions that are very technical, I may not be able to answer them. But the first rule is narrowing the digital divide through installation of broadband infrastructure in HUD-funded new construction and substantial rehabilitation of multifamily rental housing. And the second one is modernizing HUD's consolidated planning process to narrow the digital divide and increase resilience to natural hazards. These are really important because for the first time we dealt with broadband access and the need for access in HUD rules. So it's a really important development. So the first rule requires installation of broadband infrastructure, either hardwire or wireless equivalents, when new construction or substantial rehabilitation is undertaken. And here on the slide, you can see how substantial rehabilitation is defined. It's pretty technical and jargonish, so I'll skip those bullets because you can see them on the slide. Rule number 2 is the consolidated planning process. So communities have to develop a consolidated plan. They're good usually for 3 to 5 years. And this tells HUD basically how communities will, the priorities that they have and how they will use community development funds. A program that you probably are familiar with is the Community Development Block Grant. It's a formula grant that goes to states and cities and local jurisdictions to support affordable housing and community development. So the consolidated plan now, for the first time, has to assess broadband needs for low to moderate income communities. That includes the need for wiring and for connection to broadband service in apartments and in low to moderate income residence apartments. It also addresses the need for increased competition by having more than one internet service provider to serve the jurisdiction. And in developing the plan, communities have to consult with broadband stakeholders. That includes the internet service providers themselves, as well as private organizations and public organizations and citizens themselves as well. So now I'm going to talk to you about what I love most, because this is what I work on every day. Connect Home USA. It is a platform for public-private collaboration to bridge the digital divide in public housing communities. It is truly the essence of public and private collaboration, because HUD doesn't provide any direct funding to the communities themselves, though we do have some funding for technical assistance. So each community designs its own solution, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. We had 28 original pilot communities. Those were public housing authorities and one Native American tribe. And now we have 56 communities. Our goal is to get to 100 communities by 2021. And through this initiative, our goal is to address the three-legged stool of digital inclusion, which is low-cost, high-speed internet access, digital literacy, and affordable devices. We couldn't do this work without our nonprofit partner, Everyone On. They're a national nonprofit devoted exclusively to closing the digital divide in low-income communities. They develop and manage the relationships with private sector partners, we call them stakeholders, who support Connect Home USA. And also, I don't have their website on here, but it's everyoneon.org. It's a great website to find low-cost internet offers in communities all around the country. So this is how Connect Home USA works. HUD and Everyone On partner together to develop policies and goals and to offer technical assistance to communities and also track their progress, help them troubleshoot. Everyone On, as I mentioned, develops relationships with stakeholders, both mostly national but also local, who provide free or low-cost internet service or resources. And then the PHAs, or the public housing authorities, and the cities come together to offer community leadership. They leverage existing programs, and they work directly with the residents to get them engaged. And all of this benefits our HUD-assisted families living in public housing and Indian housing with higher broadband adoption and other outcomes. So importantly, cities and PHAs, they're the heart of this work. Cities in particular lend their, not just their credibility, but their leadership to help convene stakeholders and develop an implementation plan. And this is really important because we ask housing authorities or the Connect Home USA sites to start their program with a local convening where they bring local organizations they might be working with, they might not be working with, to help them develop a plan, fill gaps of need, and develop a roadmap and timeline for how they're going to implement the program. And then, of course, the PHAs reach out to the residents to understand what their needs are, what their interests are, and then to offer education. And then, of course, they partner with the stakeholders to engage the residents. This is an example of the types of stakeholders that we work with. You can see it's a nice collection of both internet service providers and content providers. The other thing I wanted to mention is that our sites also leverage HUD self-sufficiency grants. So they will work with residents who are in, for example, the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, which focuses on workforce development, and connect them to the resources that are provided through Connect Home USA. And Connect Home USA also offers benefits to partners themselves. A lot of mission-oriented organizations need a space to provide their training, for example. So the PHA staff will help coordinate the work and activities, or provide a computer center for training and other outreach. It's also an easily accessible population, and this also helps many organizations meet their mission and goals. Here's a map that shows where our communities are currently located, and we are hoping to expand soon. And this is the impact that we have had thus far, and I think that these are more than likely undercounts across the board, but we do know for sure that we've helped 52,000 families, over 52,000 families connect to low-income broadband, and we've helped distribute over 10,700 devices, which is an estimated total of $1.6 million, and we also have trained at least 2,500 residents. And currently we have a study that's underway to measure the impact of connectivity on public housing residents, education, employment, and health. So I'm looking forward to seeing what those results are. And if you have any questions later, you feel free to reach out to me, Dina Lehmann-Kim at HUD.gov. You can also reach out to my colleague Maribel, who is the Director of National Programs at Everyone On. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me here. My name is James Neal. I'm a senior program officer with the Institute of Museum and Library Services here in Washington, D.C. I'm going to talk this morning or this afternoon about IMLS and projects that we have funded in the area of broadband access and digital inclusion. IMLS is what is known as a petite federal agency. We're very small. There are about 70 of us. When we're at full capacity, our operating budget is approximately $300 million per year. We are the primary resource for funding opportunities for libraries, archives, and museums across the United States, as well as the territories and freely associated states. We have, in the Office of Library Services, a system of discretionary grants as well as formula-based grants through our Grants to States program, which you might be familiar with through your state library. The strategic goals of IMLS are very library-based and very education-based. We're promoting lifelong learning. We're interested in building capacity. We're also interested in public access to information and technology, and we're always striving to achieve excellence. IMLS was authorized in 1996 by what is known as the Museum and Library Services Act, which includes the LSTA, Library Services and Technology Act, the Museum Services Act. We also have special legislation in our museum division to fund African American history and culture. In the library sector, we fund public libraries, academic libraries, school libraries, major research institutions, as well as archives. I mentioned our Grants to States program. Each year, every state in the United States receives a population-based formula grant. This grant is then distributed with the consultation of the state libraries as how they choose to serve their communities. I'd like to speak one moment about a project that I recently funded with the State Library of North Carolina that addresses the homework gap. They have hired a digital inclusion librarian, and they want to address students who are being given educational homework and lessons online, yet they may not have internet access at home. I was a librarian at Prince George's County here in the state of Maryland. And as a children's librarian, I would often see families, mostly from immigrant communities, come to the library and stay till the wee hours of the night trying to complete homework assignments. And I began to wonder what this was all about. It's because they don't have access to devices at home. They don't have internet at home, but they're being assigned homework at home. The homework gap is still needed to be addressed. I work in what's known as the discretionary side of the Office of Library Services at IMLS. We have some nationally competitive library programs that include the Laura Bush 21st Century Librarian Program, which is all about training and education and professional development for librarians in the workforce. We have also our National Leadership Grants for libraries. These are innovative and project-based designed grants for libraries across America. We also have special dispensation for Native American and Native Hawaiian library services. In the discretionary grant funding, we have several categories of grants. Planning grants, which will give initial planning to projects. Forum grants, these are an opportunity to discuss ideas. Project grants, these are meant to scale up and fully flesh out projects, and then research grants. An example of a discretionary grant in the area of digital inclusion that I was proud to work with, Sharon Strover, professor at the University of Texas at Austin, has looked at the concept of Wi-Fi hotspot lending, which is occurring in public libraries across America. People are able to check out Wi-Fi hotspots through their library, take them home, and have access to the internet. Sharon looked at rural libraries in Kansas and in Maine and discovered many ways in which libraries are helping people get access to the internet at home. Rural libraries are extremely important. I will talk to you a little bit later about a program that we just launched this year that will be funding in June that deals with small and rural libraries. But rural libraries are extremely important to their communities. I want to talk a little bit about some broadband infrastructure projects that we funded. Several years ago, I think about 2013, 14, or 15, we funded a project with San Jose State University using TV white space. TV white space is using the unused parts of the television broadcast spectrum to deliver internet access from a library to Wi-Fi hotspots in communities. It has been fairly successful. The technology is still in its infancy. Microsoft has put a lot of money into this, and IMLS has funded several projects in this area. This allows places that are out of, people who are outside of the library to not have to come to the library to have access in their communities. We are also funding this year, or in the past couple of years, a project known as Community Second Nets. This allows libraries to be places of communication during disaster response. We're living in a very volatile world and global environment. We see the rise of more natural disasters, and libraries are a place where people can come for shelter, refuge, as well as communication. Wi-Fi hotspots, TV white space, access to the internet are all important. Libraries are approaching the digital inclusion and digital divide sector by also helping people understand how to use technology. Access is one thing, but digital literacy is also very important. TV white spaces is a growing area. I'd be happy to talk to anyone who has any questions about this. It's a very exciting part of providing broadband infrastructure through communities. TV white space involves no wires, no towers, no permissions, no third parties, no monthly fees. We're also working with Simmons University to look at how libraries measure their capacity for broadband deployment. What do they actually have within their networks? You'd be surprised as to how little attention some libraries are paying to what kind of capacity and speeds their libraries have. Public access computers, access to the internet and libraries remains important. This project is being also done in consultation with the Open Technology Institute, with the New American Foundation. This is currently going on. The researcher's name is Colin Rhinesmith. How can public libraries utilize broadband measurement tools to develop a better understanding of the relationship between library network infrastructure and digital services, which is what they're attempting to do? This is what I really want to emphasize this afternoon. IMLS in fiscal year 19 and fiscal year 2020, we hope we will continue to fund this project. But this year we focused on small and rural libraries. How can we reach those areas of America that may not apply for federal funding? We received a tremendous outpouring from libraries across America. At the end of June, we will be announcing awards to 6 to 8, perhaps 8 to 10 small and rural libraries on the topic of digital inclusion. I've read all of these proposals. I have pushed them forward, several forward for green lighting. They all deal with some form of either broadband infrastructure or digital literacy. Please be on the lookout for this announcement. We're also funding in this area projects related to school libraries, as well as community archives and community memory projects. Please connect with us online. I'm a big fan of social media myself. I'm at James3, the number 3, Neal on Twitter. I tweet a lot about libraries and digital inclusion, as well as broadband access. And IMLS is also on social media. Feel free to contact me at jneal@imls.gov. Thank you for your time today.
Okay. Thank you to all the panelists. Thank you to those of you who are here and those of you who are out there in the audience. Thanks to the Internet Society for live streaming this. We have some time for some Q&A. So if there's anyone with questions in the audience, please ask them.
Can we use the wireless mic so people online can hear the...
I have some backup questions, just in case.
Okay, who has the question?
Any questions in the audience? If you have thank you. If you have a question, please let us know who you are and where you're from. Thank you.
I am Sophia. Pardon me, my voice has gone wrong. I am Sophia Kaitazi Whitlock. I come from Greece, Thessaloniki, Aristotle University. I want to put a question which may be a kind of challenge to all the speakers. In order to question and to elaborate on the idea that the internet or all the new digital media, broadband, etc., mobiles, they are not simply a tool. As so far, I understand, I may be wrong, of course, that most of the speakers, they analyze in terms of technology as a tool. But I think that I want to ask you if we could consider the internet in particular as a space for action, as a space of society, social interaction, exchanges, transactions, etc., and therefore as a space which we need to humanize and to create quality of life on the internet in order for us not to be either bullied or hunted or lonely, etc., etc.
That's a very philosophical question. Very good one. Would any of you like to take a first crack at what you think?
I'll take a stab. If no one, yep. Yes, you mentioned a very important aspect of the internet as a space, as rather than a tool. As a librarian and someone who is interested in digital literacy, there are parts and components of not just knowing how to modify a document from a PDF to a Word doc. There are aspects of using the internet in a humane and productive and efficient way that needs to be taught so that people are good stewards of the internet. There's an area that I work in that relates to digital or data privacy and security, teaching people how to keep themselves safe online. I think privacy and security is a growing area of concern, as we've seen with issues related to Facebook and various data breaches from other large sectors of the technology market. So you're right to talk about it as a space in which we need to perform in a more equitable and humanistic way.
I would just add one other perspective, which is in our roles, we have the privilege of working on setting certain standards. And as James alluded to, our agency is working on development of privacy standards. I think through the funding mechanisms, other agencies can set guidelines for what certain programs should or should not include. But when you're working with the responsibility of administering federal funding, you have to also recognize that small changes can have very large ripple effects, so you have to proceed carefully. But I think it's a very good perspective and one that I think all these agencies consider when they're making investments.
Thank you.
I would just add that for us, yes, you're right. It is. We are talking about the internet as a tool, but also as a vehicle through which to access important information that can improve people's quality of life and their futures. So that's really the goal. And I should have said this before. Connect Home USA started to close as an effort to close the homework gap in HUD-assisted communities, and that was the goal. And then now we're also focused on helping families and elderly log on and do it well.
And I think you're touching on an issue why we present this slide around the connected community, because we want to see this more holistically. So yes, broadband access and use is a tool, but really ultimately it's like what comes out of that and what is sort of the systemic effects that we would like to see. So again, I think the whole issue of training and use and expanding the definition of digital literacy or digital skills into some of the skills that you mentioned, whether it's protecting your privacy or how to conduct productive civil discourse. That's all part of sort of the digital education that we would like to see.
Any other questions? Yeah, right here. Thank you for your help.
I'm Jeff Gary with Georgetown Law. I have a question that's slightly related to that and touches on sort of all of your answers, which is a lot of the presentations were supply side focused largely in terms of providing more access or bringing new tools to communities or bringing new educational opportunities. And there were hints and allegations of sort of the demand side of bringing in what consumers are needing and what the communities need. And I'm wondering, if you could touch more on what you're seeing from that side in terms of what's informing the research and what's informing the build out and how that's playing into the capacity building.
That's a good question as well. Thank you for your question. It's Jeff, right? Yep. When I worked at Prince George's County Library System, I was head of digital services for about a year after I was a children's librarian. And one of the things that I found interesting, I spent a lot of time helping people access and learn how to use various personal devices, including Kindles, iPads, and e-readers. So there's a great interest in knowing how to use devices, which is a part of digital inclusion. Also, there's so many online resources that require specific knowledge and digital literacy to know how to use, including governmental information. So there's a lot of eGov, and there's also a huge interest in health-related information, knowing how to parse the various websites related to health. People now are using the internet to actually do doctor visits through telehealth, by not actually physically visiting their doctor, but by having a telehealth session on the internet. So we're seeing uptick in those types of projects in libraries.
As I mentioned, and as you probably saw throughout the presentation, we're very field-oriented, and we're very, we really focus a lot on direct communication and working with communities on the ground. And one thing, I think this kind of informs some of our technical assistance approach, in that a lot of times when communities come to me, they're like, what technologies should we teach? What technologies should we buy? What is, and how do we fund that? Those are like the questions. And I'm usually at that point, okay, let's step back a moment. What are your main community goals? Like, is it, there can be multiple goals, and of course, homework app is one, economic development, building a workforce, and I said, really trying to hone in as to what your community priorities are, and sort of the demand side will determine a lot of the programs that are offered, the strategic partnerships that are built, as well as the technologies that are chosen. So much, particularly as I work with, again, local and state governments, who can take a little bit more of a strategic regional approach, those are my first conversations to try to drive to that, understanding what the demand and what is it that they're trying to get at, and then having, the training and the technology as supporting what those goals are.
There we go. I think I would echo the comments that my colleagues made, but I think another aspect of this too that we've looked at from OSTP's perspective is focusing on things like STEM education and promotion of STEM programs in schools, as well as workforce development and training and retraining of workers. We're certainly seeing a major shift in the workforce and the demand that jobs are now placing in terms of technical expertise. And so I think that's another component that we've spent a significant amount of time thinking about and having a sort of strategic, again, interagency approach to evaluating what the demand and what the needs are as we start to shift in both of those paradigms on education and training.
I would add just one other point of information, which is from one of our other colleagues who's not here today, but for the Department of Veterans Affairs is doing a lot of work to, as James mentioned, promote the use of telehealth for reaching veterans, especially those who are in rural areas. And one of the interesting new partnerships that they've been able to build with internet service providers is to make sure that there is zero rating in terms of data caps when low-income veterans are using the telehealth apps. So it's a small tweak, but it could have significant impact if more and more veterans are able to access those services without having any data cap penalties applied down the road.
I have a question.
Oh, the Internet Society Sherpa has a question.
I actually have a couple, but I'll do this one, which is we just have a newly reformed accessibility special interest group within the Internet Society, and along with the sort of things that you know about, like blind and deaf, a thing that's been raised with us is people with cognitive disabilities. In New York, we have, the city has an officer whose sole job it is to go through the city's websites and make them work for people that, you know, have cognitive disabilities. Do you want to address that at all?
I don't know that I have a lot of knowledge of what we may be doing. It would be great to learn more.
Well, I'm happy to raise the topic, and just for thought. And then my other question is, if you attended the digital equity thing last week, you would have heard them talk about spectrum, specifically the EBS and the threat to the EBS, and also to the use of white spaces and how this could help libraries. Do you want to comment on that?
I believe that's an open question right now before the FCC. So we don't have a lot of insight into where that may be going.
I've got two no answers, no comments. Okay.
Well, it's yeah, we can try to find, I believe that it might be coming up on an agenda item soon. But yeah, I don't have any additional information about that.
Well, for those at home, I can say that if you go to saveebs.org, you can read more about that issue for sure. Anybody else with a question? I guess you have to talk amongst yourselves.
All right, well, thank you all for being here and for your interest, and thank you so much to my colleagues for serving as panelists.